coming from various places in Africa, as well as reaching another area of the Caribbean. That our existence as a people, the conditions of existence of African people in the whole world is horrific. And this thing that now we are looking at in terms of a pandemic is one of the more recent expressions of the consequences of colonial domination. That is, the domination by foreign alien forces that gave rise to the capitalist social system, colonial capitalism, that gave rise to the power of France. We think, and I speak of France specifically because we hear the stories come from Guadeloupe and Martinique, and we hear of what is happening to people. Examples of French colonialism, and there are others that can be talked about in terms of French intervention. And we have to say something about Haiti, because Haiti was the most profound, most significant event against colonialism, against the whole colonial capitalist system that has ever occurred since its advent, in that it was a movement, a struggle that actually represented an assault on this global capitalist system. It was, which was actually what was characterized as slavery we know to be colonial slavery. This is where we saw the most powerful strike against that system. This is where we saw a consciousness among African people. We're talking about the first successful revolution of African workers in the world, the first successful, if you will, slave rebellion in history. It came from Haiti. And this was something that disrupted the colonial capitalist system globally. And it was done consciously again by African workers who declared to all oppressed and enslaved African people around the world, come to Haiti. Come to Haiti, you come to Haiti, we can be free. And which spread out its influence and actually helped to arm people who were fighting against colonial slavery in various other places around the world, and changed the map for what is now known as the United States, defeated the most powerful imperialist armies of the world, particularly France, and then they defeated England and Spain as well. And it's important to notice this about Haiti. Because again, it was central to the overall struggle against colonial domination. It affected everything that we're hearing now about from Guadeloupe and Martinique and other places like that. Haiti was central to the whole revolutionary movement, as well as the uprisings and things like that that occurred within the United States from a colonized and slave population. We have to speak to Haiti, and especially since the success of our oppressors in winning. In raising hatred of Haiti, of slandering Haiti, and within the colonized population of the Caribbean itself, and precisely because of this success, and precisely because there is a need by our oppressors to see that what happened in Haiti is not something that is emulated by oppressed African people, colonized African people throughout the Caribbean and throughout the world. And especially when we know, like Jean-Jacques Dessalines, Coupeté, Bouleka, cut hairs and burn houses, which was the most definitive, unambiguous statement what had to be done to deal with colonialism. And this brings us to a really critical question. Because the struggle that we are on when we talk about the pandemic, when we talk about colonialism, is a struggle against colonialism itself. It is something that has been portrayed by our oppressors as something necessary to mandates as such necessary, particularly when it comes to the African world and all over the African world, the United States, throughout Africa, throughout the Caribbean. As we've seen, there's tremendous resistance to dealing with the mandates of vaccination, and this has been put forth by the colonizers, by oppressors, as having to do essentially with the kind of ignorance and superstition that African people are enveloped in. when the fact of the matter is that it is not a question of science that is rejected by African people. In fact, it's a very scientific approach. It's a very scientific expression of opposition. It is a political question. It has always been a political question. We are not ignorant of the fact that between the time frame of 1347 and 1352, 1347, 1352, half the white people on the planet Earth died of plague. In 4 short years. And you can't even have a successful economy if half the population dies in 4 years. And then after that time, for the next 50 to more than 100 years, we saw that and other plagues visiting Europe and having a devastating effect on Europe. And what rescued Europe was not vaccination. What rescued Europe was the fact that it stretched out and initiated the African black people, the enslavement of African people that brought their economy back into life. And that in the process of bringing their economy back to life, they made a major fundamental assault on the economic life, the economic activity of Africans and other people who fell sway to colonial domination. We look at what's called the Caribbean. We're talking about millions of people who have been disappeared. It wasn't coronavirus that killed the indigenous people there. It was European colonialism that killed them. It was European colonialism that took us from Africa and had a devastating impact on the African continent itself, and took us to the Caribbean, took us to the Americas and what have you, and enriched and made healthy the Europeans at the expense of African people globally and at the expense of other oppressed peoples around the world. I want to share something with you that I think is really important, because it's important for African people too. There's no question about the science of vaccination. There is no doubt that vaccination is a legitimate science. The question is the political power of those who are utilizing the vaccination and those who determine when a vaccination is necessary and what it's necessary for. And I want to share that this is a recent book that was called Maladies of Empire, How Colonialism and Slavery and War Transformed Medicine, written by a white guy named Jim Dowd. And the truth of the matter is that that what we now know as vaccination is what came from Africa to the United States and to this hemisphere. Downs writes in his book that before the vaccination procedure was developed in England by Edward Jenner in the late 18th century, a different procedure called variolation or inoculation was used to confer immunity to smallpox, whereas vaccinations involve treatment with milder cowpox virus, while variolation involves inoculation, usually through a scratch or cut on the arm with material from an actual smallpox pustule. Variolation has been used in China and in the United States can be traced to slavery in 18th century Boston. An enslaved African named Onesimus introduced the famed Puritan minister Cotton Mather to inoculation as a way to prevent smallpox infection. Onesimus showed Mather the scar on his arm, sound familiar, where he had been inoculated in Africa, and explained that it was a common practice there. In the summer of 1721, a smallpox epidemic ravaged Boston, causing fear and terror among the residents. Intrigued by Onesimus' description of inoculation, Mather, a leading official in the city, believed that this new idea came from God. He advocated for the adoption of this practice in the face of the epidemic. Many physicians balked because they believed the practice was an African superstition. And in addition, they refused to accept a medical idea from an enslaved African. Anyway, this is where the vaccinations began in the United States. Inoculation happened as a consequence of what was brought to this country from Africa. And I think it's really important for us to understand that it is not the science that is the problem. It is the fact that the science in the hands of the oppressor has always been used against us, just as every other thing that has come from the oppressor. There's more that can be said in what I just mentioned here. The fact of the matter is that it was colonialism. It was the movement of so-called of slaves, enslaved Africans and other colonized people around the world that gave white European doctors access to information and also served providing a laboratory for experimentation to see how a disease was affecting people around the globe and discover the commonality of disease and the commonality and getting those cures and so often from colonized peoples ourselves. So I think it's really important to understand that and to make that distinction. We live as a subjective colonial people. We experience a consequence of oppression from a foreign and alien power. This is something that we've known for quite a while. I mean, we're talking about people who are in this discussion on today. We're talking about where Francois and Amy Success were very active in developing the theories surrounding colonialism. In fact, was a part of the whole the colonized ourselves in developing the theory around colonialism. And so there's been much written, much discussed about colonialism and what it means. But one problem that we've had and that African nationalism has moved to deal with is colonialism, again, is not simply a policy affecting one place or another place or different place in disparate ways caused by particular countries. Colonialism is something that emerged as a global social system. The social system that gave rise to the significance of white power to capitalism itself has its origin in colonial domination and expropriation of tremendous amount of value from black people, from oppressed people around the world. This is the essence of the contradiction that we are dealing with. It is the colonizer who decides what is illness and what is the cure. It is the colonizer with a political economy that revolves around commodity production. Production simply for profit. That means that, so what we call healthcare and things like that, it's not something that's practiced in order to cure illness. It is to make profit. And this is one of the reasons that Africans and other people are suspicious of the entire medical profession as it's characterized, because it is a profit-generating sector of a global colonial capitalist system. So that is something that's needed, that we understand and that we need to clarify for masses of our people. Secondly, that what we live all around the world as black people, as African people, is that we live as a colonized people. The fact is that we don't have a government. We don't have citizenship. We can call ourselves Trinidadian and Bahamians and Black Americans and Ghanaians and all of these things. But the reality is we are not citizens, because citizenship is something that is conferred on a people through, it's a legal definition of a relationship that a people have to a government. The legal definition that has been one that has been imposed on us by foreigners and aliens. They are the ones who said that we Guadeloupeans or Black Americans, and that's the nicest thing that they have called us. They are the ones who have determined at different times that African people have different physiological characteristics that other people, and therefore don't need certain kinds of medicine, or that we are something that have no significance, and therefore we can be used as guinea pigs and experimenting on, etc. This is the reality that we continue with. This is the reality that's been spoken to throughout this process. So,
hold on. You listening? What's going on, sir? We was listening to Chairman Omali Ishatella, Chairman of the African People's Socialist Party and the African Socialist International, Chairman of the Black is Back Coalition. My political leadership, and I am the chair of the Black Community Control and Police Working Group for the Black is Back Coalition. And this is Black No Cop Zone. This is a weekly political education process that we hold for the community, not only on the ground, but obviously on social media, on the internet, so that it can be made available to Africans and our allies around the world. And we do this again as a political education process. It's important that we make the distinction. This is not a talk show or some kind of like, it's not a show as such. It's a political education process that we record and broadcast to the world. And for two main reasons. One, so that the masses of African people can better understand what's going on in the world and our relationship to the world, and how to navigate throughout society and struggle as a way to achieve our liberation. So, if we're going to be free, because all black people, we talk about freedom, but how we define that and how we achieve that is based on our understanding of the reason why we are not free right now. So we do the Black No Cop Zone as a way to help the people understand the origin of the oppression that African people face, not only in the U.S., but around the world. We also use this as a way to build an organization, because part of our understanding, and when I say our, I'm talking about those of us who are aligned with the political philosophy of the African People's Socialist Party, the revolutionary theory of African internationalism, that helps us understand the way forward, and is a worldview that speaks to the interests and from the perspective of the oppressed and exploited African working class. So we want to build organization that moves in accordance with what the theory of African internationalism tells us. And rather than try to do a session explaining what African internationalism is, we talk about what's going on in the world and explain it from an African internationalist perspective. So, and I want to, before we move forward, encourage everybody to register and to attend the upcoming Black People's March on the White House that's going to be led by the Black is Black Coalition. This is scheduled to occur this Saturday, November 6th, starting at Malcolm X Park in Washington, D.C. We're going to march on the White House and raise up a number of demands, the most of which is deepening resistance to police terror, free and honor all our Black political prisoners, and Black community control of the police. So this is the overarching theme of the march that we're going to be holding on the 6th. And it's important that you know about this and that you be at the march, because it's not just enough to explain the world as we are doing in this process, but more than that, we have to use what we understand about the world as a means of changing or really transforming society, transforming the world, and the conditions that we experience as a people. So that's why we do Black No Cop Zone. And there's a couple of main topics that we want to deal with tonight, one of which is the question of Haiti. In fact, the theme, or the main theme that was used to promote this session of Black No Cop Zone is resist U.S. military occupation of Haiti. And we should have said Black community control the police on top of that. And this slogan, this particular theme of the session is informed by the current situation in Haiti that threatens the U.S. It threatens U.S. Military intervention in Haitian society in a way that has not occurred in the recent past. So, and this is in response to this kidnapping of the white missionaries, the colonial missionaries that were kidnapped by, supposedly or allegedly, by an organization known as 400 Mawozo. So out of that process, the U.S. has raised the consideration of not necessarily sending its own forces into Haiti to get the white people that were kidnapped, but perhaps to send the UN in. And it's important that we understand this question and what relationship that organizations like 400 Mawozo should have to the resistance against this occupation and to the ongoing struggle for Black self-determination and African liberation. So we're going to talk about that. And but before we get into that, we also want to talk about the dynamics of the struggle against the domestic colonial state, the police occupation of the oppressed and exploited Black community that's going on in places like where we at right now in Philadelphia, where pigs run up and down the Ave, with their sirens, driving like maniacs, hitting people, etc. So we want to talk about the status of the struggle to evict or expel the pigs from the oppressed and exploited African community. And this is an important discussion to have because, as we know, there's been a lot of motion around the question of police, motion primarily by the African working class since 2014 when Mike Brown was murdered by the Ferguson Police Department, and subsequently the masses rose up. The masses of African workers rose up in Ferguson and other cities throughout the country, saw similar rebellions occur within the next 2-year period. And then, of course, we have in May of 2020, the rebellions that sparked in response to the police, the Minneapolis police murder of George Floyd. And of course, as we know, that sparked a rebellion in Minneapolis, but also spread to more than 10,000 protests and other forms of political action were held around the George Floyd question subsequent to his May 2020 murder. So there's been a lot of struggle, a lot of activity around the police question inside the U.S., and some of the activity has even involved sectors of the colonizer or white population that has its own beef with the U.S. Capitalist colonialist state, but not in the way that the African community does. But we're going to talk about that. But the thing I wanted to talk about in relation to that, I saw this quote that a comrade had posted. This is a comrade out of Azania, or some of y'all may know it as South Africa, but this is a quote that's by the Russian revolutionary V.I. Lenin, who was the chair of the Bolshevik Party and who led the Russian Revolution. And we are not Bolsheviks, Marxists, or Russians, but we do recognize the science that Lenin's organization applied to revolutionary struggle and their understanding of contradictions within capitalist society and how to overturn them as a way to usher in socialism in general. So, you know, we have a lot of regard for what the Bolsheviks did in 1917, but this quote that was posted by the comrade struck me because it speaks to a certain kind of condition that we are experiencing as an African liberation movement right now within U.S. borders and perhaps beyond. So the quote reads, it's not difficult to be revolutionary when the revolution has already broken out and spread. When everyone joins the revolution for a simple inclination to follow fashion, sometimes even for personal career reasons. It's much harder and much more precious to know how to be revolutionary when the conditions for a direct, open, truly mass fight don't exist yet. To know how to defend the interests of the revolution in non-revolutionary institutions in a non-revolutionary environment between a mass unable to immediately understand the need for the revolutionary method of action. So this is a really important quote, and I don't have the ability to copy and paste it on any of the chat rooms that's watching right now, but I will put it in the comments after we finish this broadcast. But essentially what Lenin is saying is that it's easy to quote unquote be a revolutionary or hold a revolutionary line when the people is involved in revolutionary struggle, and when there's which cannot occur in the absence of a revolutionary party that makes the masses of the people aware of the need for revolution. And when we say revolution, we make a distinction between revolutionary struggle and simply, mass resistance, which is extremely important, and which what we saw in Ferguson and George Floyd. We saw mass resistance. We saw an immediate response and resistance, a righteous rebellion against the system in response to what the police are known to do in black communities around the country. So, but the thing is that resistance alone is not necessarily a revolutionary struggle, because when we talk about revolution, we talk about overturning a social system. And in the social system that we are living under right now of colonial capitalism, the primary contradiction is twofold. One, based in the fact that you have oppressor nation and you have oppressed nation. You have the white North American, European, the white oppressive nation that has its centers in North America and in Europe, and that impose its political and economic will on the rest of the world through military domination, through the imposition of neo-colonial state power, police, prisons, militaries that function in the economic interests of Europe and North America. So this is the problem that everybody who's not white is confronted with, this foreign and oppressive domination over our lives. And alongside with that, that domination does not just have a political basis, but more importantly, it has an economic basis. Because we say colonial capitalist, and colonial referring to the foreign and oppressive domination that we experience by another nation, by a white nation. But we also talking about class exploitation that occurs in the process of this foreign domination, where all of the wealth that is produced in the capitalist, colonial capitalist economy is socially produced by African and indigenous workers around the world. There would be no coffee, a Maxwell House, or Taster's Choice coffee at your local supermarket if it wasn't for the social or collective labor that is carried out in places like Guatemala, Colombia, and Haiti, where the coffee is literally dug up from the earth and put onto boats and airplanes to be taken to the U.S. and then packaged as Maxwell House and Folgers, etc. So, but the problem exists that all of that wealth that we just described, from the picking of the coffee to the packaging of the coffee, all of the wealth that is produced as a result of that labor, which is social, is privately owned by the white colonial capitalist ruling class, the sons and daughters of slave masters, the ones who invaded Europe and stole us and took us throughout the world against our will to exploit our labor, etc. So that's the problem that we are confronted with. And so when we talk about resistance versus revolution, revolution aims to overturn this colonial capitalist relationship. So one, it means that Africa would be free and independent, to have its own economy, free of these exploitative loans and other forms of exploitation that occur between Africa and Europe and North America today, and China as well. But also free from class exploitation of the African working class and the theft of its labor. So that means that even as the independence is achieved, the power to control and run the government and create policy is in the hands of the workers. So that exploitation is outlawed, and so now you have a situation in which the wealth which is socially produced is also socially owned. So this is what we talk about when we talk about revolution. However, when the rebellions of Mike Brown and George Floyd occurred, these were not struggles in which the people who were involved in such resistance were conscious of what the long-term objectives of the resistance was. And so, therefore, the movement and the resistance itself was vulnerable to ideological and political exploitation at the hands of our class exploiters, primarily of the white colonial capitalist ruling class. So, for example, in Ferguson, even though the people were saying kill the police, when Mike Brown got murdered by the pigs in Ferguson, the first thing that people said was kill the police. But we were not organized. There was not an organization on the ground that could achieve that demand, that could coordinate a certain type of resistance amongst the people, not only in Ferguson, but everywhere else that oppressed black communities exist, to achieve that demand. And more than that, there was no organization or philosophy that could speak to the question of what do we do after we kill the police, in terms of what type of society are we trying to build, beyond the question of destroying the colonial capitalists. So, and this may seem like a petty point to make, but history has shown us in we'll even look at the history of the Haitian Revolution or Haiti as an example of how the revolutionary process can be interrupted and derailed as a consequence of lack of organizational and ideological clarity and cohesion. So this is why we get into these questions for those who care. And for us, it's not enough just to have resistance as such, although we unite with the resistance and we throw bricks too. But more than that, we want to make sure that the resistance has the ability to sustain itself. And the only way the resistance can sustain itself is if the people are conscious of the political goals of the resistance. In Haiti, we didn't stop coup d'etat, bullet kind, until all the heads was chopped and all the houses was burnt and black people had full control of the territory. And so the strategic aims and objectives of resistance must be identified by some organization who assumes the responsibility of leading the people to a concrete form of freedom and socialism. So this is why we make a distinction between just resistance and revolutionary struggle. And the reason why I'm saying all this in response to the Lenin quote, because what Lenin is talking about is periods in which there is the question of revolution is not on the table, and in the sense of what we mean by revolution. Now, some may say revolution, in a kind of abstract way without really having a concrete or scientific definition of it, or much less organization and tactics and strategies to achieve it. But we are very clear and concise on what we mean by revolution. And we are confronted with a situation, as Lenin was describing his quote, where this is not a revolutionary period, although we are rapidly approaching one. But I say that because even as the resistance following the George Floyd rebellions occurred, the only political motion and struggle against the police and what they do to black people has reared its head primarily under the leadership of the U.S. government itself, in the form of the local Philadelphia government and the district attorney and other wings of the colonial capitalist state. I'm talking about Philadelphia, but this can be said about any city around the country in terms of, because we all know that the rebellion stopped. The rebellion stopped. And this is not a criticism of the people, although it is a self-criticism within our movement in terms of our failure to sustain a resistance, but not only that, but to win the people to certain strategic objectives of the resistance itself. So like in the city of Philadelphia, many of y'all probably seen the headlines where the local city council and the mayor just signed off on this new bill that essentially would prevent or disallow the police from stopping African people for lower level traffic offenses, like broken taillights and misplaced registration stickers is what they said in the articles. So these are no longer reasons that the police can stop you. And so, and this is summed up as a victory by the people in general, in terms of now we have pushed back a certain particular form of democratic attacks on a democratic right just to drive down the street. So in a certain kind of way, this can be summed up as a certain kind of victory, but at the same time, we can't, because it's not like the traffic stops is the only time or the primary reason why black people are engaged by the police. I was just leaving my girlfriend's crib yesterday morning, and I see their SWAT team literally conducting a home invasion across the street. I got video of it. I got video. I need to post that. You know what I mean? And SWAT teams and other forms of task forces consistently occupy our community and attack the democratic rights of black people, no-knock raids, many of which result in people being shot and killed, like Ayanna Jones in Detroit, Breonna Taylor, but this is ongoing police colonial terror that is inflicted on black people that does not occur, it has no relationship to traffic stops. And but this is a contradiction that this new so-called victory doesn't even speak to. More than that, really, to keep it a buck with y'all, that same traffic law that was just passed, at the same time, the city is signing off, the mayor signing off on this bill that prevents the police from stopping you for lower level traffic offenses. And at the same time, literally, the city announced that they are pulling together a new task force within the city's traffic division that does have the ability to stop you for traffic offenses. And we're supposed to, I guess, feel tricked or okay because they are not formally a part of the Philadelphia Police Department, but neither is the National Guard. But we know that the National Guard functions as an arm of the colonial state. So the point is that the traffic stop is not the question, right? But in a period where the people do not understand the long-term the strategic objectives of struggle and resistance, and again, that's not an attack on the people, that's an attack on myself. That's an attack, that's a self-criticism as an organizer who has to this point failed in his task of winning the people to understand what we should not accept from the state and what the demands and set the discussion entirely. So, because the reality is that when the city council member Isaiah Thomas first wrote this bill and proposed it to the rest of the city council, he is quoted as to he's literally talking about how black people have to plan their routes home in recognition of the fact that there's certain spots and strips that are more heavily policed than others. He uses the real stop and frisk of the 250,000 Africans that were stopped by the police in every year of this clear racial bias towards police activity as the basis for the law. So we say, and the only reason why any of that is even being discussed, because the police kill black people every day in this country. George Floyd wasn't the only damn African that got killed by the pigs. We know that shit. But the reason why all these reforms are now being introduced by the government is because we hit the streets. The people took to the streets and demanded that the U.S. government respond to the terror, the suffering that African people face at the hands of police. So now the city council is scurrying on different cities, is scrambling to come up with ways to make it look like we are making progress, but the fundamental contradiction remains. Because again, even as the pigs are now no longer allowed to stop you on the streets, but the SWAT teams can raid your home anytime they want to. They can stop you walking down the street anytime they want to. It's called stop and frisk, and up till now, it's legal for the police. They call it proactive policing. So it is clear that the question is not just that of traffic stops, no more than it is of body cameras or whether or not they should wear tasers or not. So, but Lenin's quote is speaking to the question of the people's understanding, because the people make history and the people make revolution. And if we are in a period where this is being the people are not organized and conscious of our own material interests, then we will follow the leadership of the most organized force that is claiming to respond to our oppression. And that in the city of Philadelphia right now, that is coming in the form of city council as well as the district attorney. So yesterday, the city of Philadelphia, but before I would go to the district attorney thing, I'm gonna get to that. But the most important thing that we gotta say that I don't wanna, if they can use or win this law, this new bill on the fact that black people are disproportionately stopped and harassed by the police, then it's by logic, it would not be enough just to say that they should no longer be allowed to stop you for traffic offenses. It's clear that if the police move based on your race, the fact that you are African, then it's clear that the entire organization has to be disbanded, and that the black community itself must have the right to mobilize for its own security. So, and the fact is that city council, if it wanted to, can write a law that would just disallow the police from functioning within particular territories, and we define those territories as those that are most heavily policed, and in which the most arrests occur and the most stops occur. And these numbers are available, and it is in these areas, Strawberry Mansions and whatnot, North Philly, West Philly, South Bronx, etc. And these areas is where the power to the people is needed the most. And so city council, just as they can argue for traffic stop law reform, can argue for a reform in terms of the management and the control of security, or what they call public safety within their city. They can do that. And the mayor, in fact, we went as Black Community Control of the Police in 2018, 19, 17. We started going to the city council meetings demanding that they adopt our Black Community Control of Police resolution. In 2017, the Black Community Control of Police, Black is Back Coalition, we went to the city council meeting and said that this is the law that you need to pass, the Black Community Control of Police resolution that calls for, one, the immediate, independent, and democratically elected Black Community Control of Police Commission, or Black Community Security Council, which would again mobilize for our own security and resolve the contradictions within our community on our own terms. And two, this commission would have the power to hire, fire, and set training standards and discipline the armed forces within our community. So even as we don't have total control over the security apparatus in our community, the most that should be done, the least that should be done, is the right for the Black community itself to hold police forces accountable for their actions. You have this situation called stop and frisk, right? Where even though your Fourth Amendment right supposedly gives you the right to protest, stop or detainment and search that is not preceded by a probable cause or reasonable suspicion. And in fact, they even have a motion, if you get stopped and they find a gun on you, and you gotta go straight to county jail for that. And there's a motion within every court system in this country called a motion to suppress. And the reason why the motion to suppress exists is because the U.S. State recognizes the fact that the police don't have the right to obtain quote unquote contraband under any old situation. And again, if it is on the police to show probable cause and reasonable suspicion for having stopped you in the first place. And so there's many, including myself. I was arrested, did 2 weeks on State Road on a gun charge. My lawyer, my public defender, filed a motion to suppress. And sometime shortly after that, the district attorney dismissed the charges. And I believe that's because they know they didn't have a case in the first place. It was on video where the police ran up on me with no probable cause or reasonable suspicion. And this is a very common scenario as it relates to gun charges. And and many Africans actually beat their charge through filing the motion to suppress, right? Now, it seems that based on that, the police that arrested you and took your weapon, etc., illegally should suffer consequences for doing so, right? But where's the recourse for that? Where is the process to hold the police accountable for illegally stopping you and searching you and taking your weapon? Because according, if the motion to suppress went through, if it was accepted, that means the police fucked up. But that kind of fuck up has extreme ramifications, because it's not like I dropped a bottle of juice. This is the kind of fuck up that will result in somebody going to jail for at least 2 weeks, right? if not more, waiting for the motion or trial or, going through this entire process. What's good? Yeah, we say, fuck this no cop zone. We have a democratic right. Yes, sir. Yeah. We gotta hold it down. We African internationalists. Yes, sir. We gonna start slaying these lawyer right cards, you know what I mean? Because we got, yeah. But yeah, good looking though. But we know our rights and shit, yeah. So where is the consequences for when the police illegally stop you and arrest you for something like this with no probable cause? And then, later on you have to spend 2, 3, 6, 10 weeks in jail just to finally get your so your whole life could be destroyed in this period, right? You lose your apartment, your kids get snatched up by the system, you lose your job, all types of ramifications stemming from this mistake or this infringement on your legal supposed rights by the police. But nothing ever happens to the cops when they do this. And this is never even discussed. I've never heard of any campaign to get the police not only fired, but arrested for abuse of their power. Because that's essentially what it is. And it has life shaking, life ruining implications for the masses of the people. So, but this is why, even in a particular phase where we don't have all the power, this is the basis for certain forms of democratic struggle, where you require, as part of this BCCP, Black Community Control the Police struggle, we require that the pigs that illegally stopped you, searched you, locked you up, should be held accountable. They should be locked up for these are crimes we're talking about. Listen, y'all, but the fact that they don't speaks to the colonial nature of the police and the prison and the court system in this country. You don't have rights as African people, and even though there is like certain systems and due processes that you can follow, that one day your emotion will be heard, accepted, maybe. They let Maroon Schultz out, no doubt, or hoodoo to that, but they denied me his appeal, right? And so we are dealing with a system, right, that has to be overturned, and then under that situation, they no longer have the ability to take our freedom away from us in the way that they do. So we wanted to talk about that. For some reason, I lost 40% of my phone's energy, and that's crazy. But we're gonna go through this. But yeah, so but that's colonialism. And but you know what we can do? I do have another phone where we can continue the Facebook broadcast. But anyway, and then we want to talk about the DA, because this is another, and I gotta say all this because this is the objective reality. But Lenin was talking about periods in which, these types of so-called gains, lull the revolutionary fervor of the masses, if not the resistance as a whole. So last year, or May 2020, we was out in the streets rebelling, and as a result of lack of organization on the ground, movement on the ground, political leadership, that resistance has lulled. And now we're in a situation where the so-called solutions are coming from city council, and then of course around the case of DA prosecution and imprisonment of African people, the DA election is an important part of this discussion, because when you don't have power, then you hope that for the next best thing, which is a benevolent oppressor, which is an oppressor that will not whip you as hard, or will not chop off both of your legs, they'll only chop off one if you run away, etc. So we are confronted with a real situation in the DA election. This guy Larry Krasner, who's the current DA, who won the last DA election, and he won on a platform that was speaking to the question of the issues that the masses of Black people are truly concerned with in terms of mass imprisonment and political, police occupation and brutality, and also the political prisoners out of the city of Philadelphia. So, and Krasner has the strongest track record among all of the DA candidates to fulfill many of the demands coming from the Black community around these issues. But it's important to understand that at the end of the day, the district attorney is an arm of the state. You know, it is the prison, the court, and the police is the same state apparatus, all playing different functions. And at the end of the day, the only job of the DA is to prosecute, to lock people up. That's the only job they have. Now, different DAs will have a different approach to this question, and some, again, will have a more liberal stance around various issues, because at the end of the day, the role of the state is to maintain the status quo. The status quo to make sure production, capitalist production, continues with as much stability as possible. And when you got rebellions going on, buildings getting burned, cop cars getting burned down, that's not stability for white power. And they want, if they can, prevent that by putting forth a DA candidate that talks good and makes certain kinds of promises to the black community, then it will do that before they pull out the big guns, so to speak. And so, but even as they do so, and so Krasner is what we is that in terms of the talk. He talks good, and he has done a lot as an activist and a lawyer, or a lot more than Lynn Abraham and other DAs of the past, towards the struggle to free wrongfully convicted Africans from the prisons. Well, he's done a lot around that, and also to discipline certain police who have violated the rights of the people. He has done that as well. But it's important to also recognize that, again, the DA is an arm of the state. And at the end of the day, the colonial state, it don't have no feelings, y'all. It has interests, right? And it will move according to its most deepest fundamental interest. Now, for example, Krasner promised that he would never try a juvenile as an adult. This is part of his initial campaign platform. And there's a 16 or 15-year-old African boy named Marvin Roberts, who was arrested and tried and convicted of killing a white man from a white area close to downtown in Philadelphia known as Fairmount. And he was tried as an adult. He was 15 years old. And Krasner tried him as an adult, which is, you know, it was a contradiction because he said he wouldn't do that. And the reason why Krasner tried Marvin Roberts as an adult was because the white community demanded that he do so. And in the final analysis, the U.S. colonial capitalist state is a white people state. And it will always speak to the interests of white power and white people in the final analysis. And you can't blame Krasner for that, because it's no DA that's going to be able to change that reality. And so we saying more than waiting and wishing that for the next Larry Krasner, we have to build for the power in our own hands to determine our relationship to any other social force as Africans. So that's what we're talking about. I'm going to have to take a break on the Facebook real quick because the thing is going dead. And I don't know how that happened, but it did. So I want to make sure that we can continue this process, you know, like a part 2 kind of thing. So, but that's, you know, these are the things that we wanted to say about, but this is all important because the mass support or lack or apathy around the questions of how these issues with the police is being dealt with by the people is a consequence of a lack of revolutionary movement on the ground that can sustain a resistance and help the people move forward strategic goals and objectives. And that's why organization is so critical. That's why we got to be at the Black is Back led march on the White House on November 6th, this Saturday, to move that process forward. So the last thing, I want to just start up this one here. This is because we about to go dead on this phone, so I want to. You have to give me a second, y'all. I'll be right back. Sorry for the delay, but I wasn't expecting this phone to go dead so quick. That's crazy. That's real crazy. It's insanity. But we gotta back up. I gotta okay. This is part two. Let me make sure we're still good on this YouTube thing. All right. So this is part two, part of the interruption, y'all. Uhuru, Uhuru comrades. Yeah, Uhuru, Uhuru. So I don't know why my phone ran out so quick, but we good now. We on another phone. So this is part two for Facebook of Black No Cop Zone. So we want to get straight into the discussion on Haiti. It's gonna be a little challenging because the phone that has my notes is is up here now, so I won't be able to look at all my notes, but I can really give you the most important aspects of this presentation. So like you said, we want to talk about the threat of U.S. military intervention in Haiti right now, and this is an important discussion to have because we have to build part of the struggle to for Black liberation, for African liberation, involves the struggle for territory, and we want to, in as many geopolitical territories on the planet Earth as possible, establish liberated spaces, no cop zones, where the imperialists cannot function, where the state, the white colonial capitalist state, cannot function, and in which the Black community, under the leadership of its revolutionary organization, have control over the economy and the political system, or the dictatorship. So this is the vision of Omali Ishitella and the African People's Socialist Party and the ASI. And the Haiti question is extremely important to us for a number of reasons, including the fact that it is a vastly majority African population there, and they experience deep and profound suffering and oppression, partly or mainly as a result of Haiti's history being the first liberated Black republic in 1804, as we know. And I'm not going to go through all the details of Haiti's history because the main point of this presentation is not so much to teach the history of Haiti as much as it is to demonstrate the role that the U.S. imperialist state has played in Haiti ever since it won its liberation in 1804, and why it's important that we overturn that domination in the by the African working class, and most importantly, to speak to the question of the so-called, well, what the white media is calling gangs and shit, but these are organizations that must be won to the revolution, and must be organized to advance the material interests and democratic rights of the masses of the people on the ground there, not just to fill their own pockets. So this is why we wanted to have this discussion, and so you can be really clear, because a lot of what I've been seeing in the news media, this is really why I want to talk about this Haiti question right now, is because the white imperialist media is on a media campaign to slander these African working class organizations that they call gangs. And it looks like what they did to Taliban in Afghanistan, where they get ready to launch some type of offensive against the people there under the guise, just like when they brought crack cocaine into our communities and whatnot, and then they deepened the police occupation of the black community under the guise of a war on drugs and war on gangs and whatnot. And it would not be surprising to see imperialism trying the same shit there. They are. That's what they are doing right there, right now. So it's important that the African working class be hip to the dynamics of this whole history and the current situation so that we can move according to our interests and know who we should be uniting with. And the damn sure is not the UN. So what I want to say is that in 1804, Haiti won its revolution under the leadership of Jean-Jacques Dessalines, who was a slave himself, who was a worker, a field nigga. And he led the resistance to its conclusion and was able to establish the first, federated black republic in the form of Haiti. And so that was important. But what's also important to discuss is that Dessalines was assassinated, and he was set up by, according to most historic accounts, he was set up by two of his comrades, forces who fought alongside with him. And these forces, I think one's name was Christophe, and the other's name was man, don't get me to Persev. And so these cats built their own kind of like factions of the Haitian Republic, one in the north, one in the south. And ever since that split occurred, Haiti has been, and the masses of people in Haiti have been a victim of one form of neo-colonial domination or another. In fact, I think that one of the first, if not the first instance of the application of the neo-colonial strategy by US and European imperialism occurred in Haiti after reading about this shit, because as early as 1915, after a number of coups and other forms of conflict occurred within the Haitian government, none of which really spoke to the interests of the workers. After a number of these coups and whatnot, yeah, we need to adopt rank choice. Okay, I'm not sure what he said. Land back, but yeah, voodoo. In 1915, the U.S. government essentially began to intervene in Haiti's affairs, partly because Germany and some Germans were gaining a foothold in its economy. But the point is that in 1915, between this period 1915 and like 1927, the U.S. reimposed colonial domination over Haiti. And but it's neo-colonial domination because the U.S. Under the guise of dealing of forcing Haiti to pay off debt that it owed as a consequence of having to pay France back, the U.S. had positioned itself as the new colonial administrator over Haiti. But a part of that process in 1915, alongside Marine military occupation, they literally rewrote the Haitian Constitution. And in fact, the U.S. President, Franklin D. Roosevelt, is the one that wrote Haiti's new president. And one of the revisions that Roosevelt made in Haiti's president was that foreign party can now, he abolished Haiti's law that prohibited foreign powers or forces from being able to own land. So the U.S., as part of its colonial domination over Haiti, rewrote the Constitution so that it was now legal for foreign forces to own land. And in this process, the U.S. began to impose its economic will on Haiti's economy and the people, because at the same time, the U.S. Marines functioned as a standing army, and literally it wrote other laws. Roosevelt's laws, like one law that he wrote, required Haitian workers to build the infrastructure that would advance the material interests of the U.S. So they literally forced Haitians to build the railways throughout Haiti. the workers themselves, Haitians, had to work as slaves to build this infrastructure that would facilitate the U.S.'s ability to extract the raw materials that it needs. So this happened, and what I'm trying to say is that U.S. military presence in Haiti has always functioned to advance the economic interests of the U.S. And subsequent to the U.S. Marine occupation of Haiti that began in 1915 but extended well into the late 20s and early 30s, this same process occurred. And you had one neo-colonial force after another that used its power over the Haitian neo-colonial state to advance the interests of the U.S. And like I said, a lot of the notes that speak to the specifics of how this played out in a lot of instances, and there was resistance. Haitians fought the U.S. Marines and were killed in the tens of thousands by the U.S. Marines in this process. But what's important to understand, just as we say, Africa is not poor, Africa is being looted. The history of Haiti's economy and poverty is a history of U.S. Military intervention and occupation for the means of extracting Haiti's resources and exploiting the masses of people in Haiti for their labor. And again, under every single neo-colonial regime that followed beyond the U.S. Marine occupation has been more of the same. And so now we fast forward to a situation where the Prime Minister of Haiti, what's his name, Jovenel Moïse, was assassinated, and nobody will say who it was, but there was a lot of forces that had a motive to do so, because even before Moïse's assassination, the masses of Haiti were in the streets demanding reforms and whatnot, based on the wretched conditions that the people was forced to live in, and that they attributed to Moïse. So this was the situation, even before Moïse' killing. But after his death, there was literally a vacuum was created in Haitian society, where there's no infrastructure, no hospitals to speak of, no schools. The situation is very bad for the masses of the people in Haiti. And so now you have the situation where you have organizations on the ground, clearly. The white media calls them gangs, and some of whom worked as thugs or hired guns for the politicians, the neo-colonial politicians in Haiti, including Jovenel Moïse, hired guns to make sure that the people would vote for these guys whenever elections came up. So some of these gangs have their origins and got their guns from this neo-colonial source. But you have a situation now where there's not very much for a lot of those same forces to be loyal to today. And so you see the situation of the kidnapping of the white colonial missionaries that happened about 2 weeks ago. So 15 or maybe 17 white people got kidnapped by one of the so-called gangs. The U.S., the white media says it was an organization known as 400 Mawozo. And now, to this day, the missionaries are still being held captive. And they are demanding $1 million per head. That's the ransom that allegedly 400 Mawozo is putting on the heads of the missionaries that have been kidnapped. So, and to this day, there has not been a resolution. So, based on all available information that we have, those white people, those 17 white people, is still tied up in somewhere, in some basement in Haiti. And I say right on to that. I say, go ahead, 400 Mawozo, Uhuru. Because, I mean, we can talk about the history that the missionary, the white colonial missionary, has had, or the role that the missionary has played in the colonization of Africa and African people around the world. The missionary has always functioned as a propagandist for white power, to neutralize any militant or revolutionary capacity in the heads and minds of the people by forcing bourgeois Christianity down our throat. I say bourgeois Christianity because the real Christ, if that's what you want to call him, was a revolutionary and a socialist. So when we say bourgeois Christianity, we're talking about the version of the revolutionary Yeshua or Christ, the bourgeoisie's version of his life that they have selectively created to justify slavery. You know, good, they say good slave is good to his master and the reward is in the afterlife and shit like that. But the point is that it has been the role of the missionary to brainwash the people, to kidnap African children from their families and raise them to be confused and to not even know who the hell they are. So I don't shed no fucking tears for no white missionaries that got kidnapped. I say that the kidnapping of the white missionaries was a righteous act of resistance against centuries-long white occupation and domination of African people's lives. So I stand in full, both feet firmly planted in unity with, if it's 400 mawozo, then I say right on. Now, whether or not 400 mawozo has functioned as a neo-colonial force to attack African workers, that is another discussion, but I have not heard anything like that, and I'm not prepared. But what I know about them is that they took the righteous stance. But what we also want to say is that, just like we said in a situation in North America where you have African resistance in the streets, it's not enough to just rebel. It's not enough to just kidnap some crackers, because of the final analysis and this discussion right now happening within imperialist, the ruling class, as to what the response to the kidnapping of these white people should be. And there's been discussion about sending UN troops into Haiti to get the white people, but not only, and this is a call that has been made by the current neo-colonial prime minister of Haiti. He's begging the UN to come send troops into Haiti to not to look out for the people, and that's why I wanted my notes, because the last time the UN was in goddamn Haiti, they left a trail of blood. There's dozens, if not hundreds, of reports of UN troops killing black people in Haiti. The UN is a criminal organization that has been murdering Africans and other oppressed people all over the world. They don't talk about that. They call themselves a peacekeeping force, the UN peacekeeping mission. But what the hell is peace? On a plantation. It might be peace for the slave master, like the chairman say, is when the slave is not fighting back. That's peace for the slave master. But for the slave, peace is the death of the slave master. So when the UN talks about its role as a peacekeeping force, you gotta ask yourself, well, what kind of peace you talking about? And like I said, it's a lot of reports of human rights abuses and other atrocities that the UN has committed against African people in Haiti. And when the prime minister of Haiti right now calls for the UN to send troops, you know that he's not doing that because he cares about the welfare of the masses of African workers in Haiti. Because if he did, then he wouldn't send these thugs and criminals in. He would talk about the Black Liberation Movement. He would call Omali Yeshitela, hey, can you send some of the Bloods and Vice Lords in to help organize a solution for the people? Nah, you know what I mean? But that's part of what the role of Black community control of the police must play. Whether anybody else understands it or not, we understand as Black community control of the police that our role is not simply just to live as some happy slaves under Larry Krasner and the Uncle Tom City Council, but we need to build a revolutionary security force that doesn't only secure the interests of Black workers here in Philadelphia, but when necessary, we send forces to Haiti to deal with imperialism and neo-colonialism there. So, but the Prime Minister of Haiti is not talking like that because he's the petty bourgeoisie, and all he cares about is being the Prime Minister and keeping white power pleased. So what our call is today is for you to join the Black Community Control the Police Working Group and to be in Washington, D.C. on Saturday, November 6th, as we march on the White House to demand, again, to deepen the resistance to police terror, to raise up and to free all of our Black political prisoners, and to build the movement for Black community control of the police. I will be there, and if you want to hook up, please be there as well. Go register right now to blackisbackcoalition.org. So that's all we want to say. There's a lot of other historic details that we did not deal with in this discussion, but you get the point. And you can, do your own research to gain a better understanding of the situation in Haiti and whatnot. But that's it for today. Uhuru. Oh, wait, there's more. I'm glad it didn't click in. I did also want to say some things. Budget, what's it called? Joe Biden, the U.S. imperialist president, he has this thing on the table called Build Back Better. Some of y'all may have heard of it. And this ties into this whole question of if you African or some kind of American Negro, you know what I'm saying? Because what Biden is attempting to do, although, really he's beefing up the U.S. colonial state through this budget, but how, that's a whole other discussion in terms of this hiring program. So look, y'all, Biden has this post-pandemic kind of proposal, and now it's been passed, I believe, called Build Back Better, right? And essentially, it's an economic program that involves $1.75 trillion. That's a very lot of money. So this budget is going towards like free pre-K and preschool and pre-K for children 4 years up is like universally provided under this supposed budget. What else is there? Medicaid, Medicare, for all stuff like this. So, and these are like real social services that really didn't even exist for oppressed people, but the African community until the Black Panther Party and the Black Revolution of the 60s made it necessary for the U.S. government to start doing shit to contend with the emerging African revolution. So like Head Start and all this pre-K stuff that Biden is now talking about, that has its origin, or that was response, counterinsurgent response to the work of the Black Panther Party. And why the reason why I'm raising this whole Build Back Better thing is because it's imperialist socialism in the final analysis. Africa, 85% of all the raw materials the U.S. needs to run its economy, from bauxite to make metal, to rubber, to make the soles of your sneakers and your tires, to coltan to keep your microwave or computer chips cool at the right temperature. All of this, 85% of all this come from Africa. At the same time, Africa only receives 0.57% of the gross domestic value of the raw materials that it exports to North America and Europe. That's less than 1% of the gross domestic value. I believe that's the name, GDV. I just looked this up right before today, right before this session. So the point is that all of the wealth, and we talked about Haiti just now, how the U.S. Marines, literally stole all the gold out of Haiti's treasury as supposed payback for its loans and shit. So the basis of the wealth of this $1.75 trillion that Biden is now distributing amongst these programs, and I'm gonna talk about that police thing. Shouts to Lisa Davis for posting that. But anyway, the $1.75 trillion, that is the wealth, that's the stolen wealth and resources and labor of African people. And that has to be understood, because they will steal from you, they'll steal $10 from you, and they give you 50 cents back and say, here, live on this for the next week. And then, we supposed to feel like that's some kind of progress, or that represents some kind of security, or that is our interest being fulfilled. Whereas, but what they don't tell you is the even harsher reality outside of North America, where in places like Haiti and throughout the African continent and throughout the African world, where we live on less than $1 a day, and that is because of that 0.57% of the gross domestic value. So imagine if Africa and African workers controlled 100% of the wealth, of the resources that are constantly being exported from Africa. So it's a really important question. And when we look at this Build Back Better, just like with the pandemic shit, the pandemic relief fund, we look at in the final analysis at welfare programs that were literally funded by our bloodshed. And so we have to really understand that and moving forward. And but more than that, all that money that we get, these services are really just designed to keep workers alive and capable of producing wealth. That's the only reason why Joe Biden wants your child to be able to go to school, so that your child can be competent enough to function in the factory or the office or wherever the hell your child's going to end up being a slave at, right? That is the only reason. And the only reason why they gave us a pandemic fund, if you want to say they gave us something, is to make sure that the bourgeoisie would still have income, because all that money that we got off the pandemic fund is just going back to the landlord, right? It just went back to Foot Locker. There's no diss on Africans who shop at Foot Locker, but I'm saying that entire pandemic fund that wasn't given to us. That was an indirect way of giving it to themselves, you know? And so that's important for us to understand. So we have to break out of this situation, because even as these so-called programs are funded and implemented throughout North American society and even throughout the colonies, they do everything in their power to strengthen the capacity of the state apparatus itself, to protect the status quo, to make sure that that money that they gave you will come right back to them and then uninterrupted, without no missionaries getting kidnapped and shit like that. So it's no surprise that in this this $1.75 trillion budget, is it really trillion? That's what they said. 385 million of it is going towards the police recruiting program. And how that even looks is really interesting, because one of the contradictions that the colonial state is confronted with, like in Philadelphia, I saw an article. I didn't have it ready up for here, but the point is that the 2020, or either 20 or 19, but one of these most recent so-called graduating classes of the Philadelphia Police Department were the smallest in its history. It was something like only like 20 people graduated from the Philadelphia Police Academy. And apparently, the colonial capitalist state of Philadelphia is experiencing, and apparently around the country, is experiencing, loss of morale and shrinking in its size. And so this is obviously the reason why Biden is allocating so much money towards the police recruitment situation. But how that recruitment strategy looks is a really important question that we have to watch, because the state, like we said about Krasner and city council, and the colonial state, itself, arms of the state, like, police departments around the country, they engage in all types of propaganda warfare and, so-called public relations type of activity to disguise the dictatorial nature of the police and the colonial capitalist state itself. So the police department, they'll set up shit like the PAL, the Police Athletic League, and, your child, they tell you to send your child down to the PAL to learn how to box and shit. And, they set up, community forums where, you supposedly have the ability to interact with the pigs, the leadership of the pigs, and voice your concerns. But you know, those town hall meetings never really result in anything but a headline and a picture saying how the police is such a democratic organization. Look, they had a meeting and they want to hear from you, you know. Or and like in Philadelphia, you got this light-skinned sister. She's not a sister, but you know, Danielle Outlaw. You know what I mean? Like I say sister in the sense that they selectively chose this woman, this Danielle Outlaw. She looks like somebody from your community. She's younger, right? She has a, you know, she looked like she could like be from your neighborhood. You know what I mean? She don't look old and ossified like Charles Ramsey, you know, the former police commissioner who, although was a Negro, was, you know, he's old and he didn't know, he wasn't connected to the youth, all that shit. But then they give you a Danielle Outlaw. She young, she from Oakland, you know, all this shit. And so these are all tactics of the colonial state to enforce or further entrench itself in our community and amongst our ranks, and to disguise the true relationship that it has with the black community. Because you ain't never gonna find no police that will allow you to take resources out of your local supermarket without paying for it. You ain't never gonna find no police that will side with the tenant who refuses to pay the landlord. You know, you never gonna find police that will force the bourgeoisie to relinquish the land that is stole from the Mexican people and indigenous people of North America. The police won't never ever do none of that shit. You know what I mean? But they will give you different forms of different forces and strategies and programs to disguise their relationship to all of these questions, you know, and to make it a subjective question, you know, as opposed to really talking about the numbers and the economic basis of policy and shit like that. So, and we already went through that for the last hour and a half, but I wanted to talk about this Build Back Better thing because it's clearly an attempt on the part of Joe Biden and a sector of the white ruling class to disguise its rule over oppressed Africans and oppressed people inside North America. And it's important that we build a movement that has its own independent trajectory and doesn't struggle as Americans or some kind of American force, but as African people that is tied to a worldwide revolutionary process and that whose strength is in its international unity and who should recognize the work that it does on any given front as being a strategic ally and component of a global strategy, just as we said how BCCP should be moving on the Haiti question. So Build Back Better is nothing but imperialist socialism, and that it is designed to chop up the stolen loot from Africa and African workers around the world amongst the North American population, and whose critical chunk of that program is dedicated to strengthening the colonial capitalist state apparatus that is responsible for keeping this entire system together within North American borders. So we don't want none of that. We don't. It's not gonna be no deal. You know what I'm saying? It's not gonna be no deal. African people in the U.S. is part of a dispersed and oppressed African nation around the world, and we want independence not only for Africans inside U.S. borders, but African people worldwide. And that is what makes the Black is Back Coalition and the African People's Socialist Party distinct from any other organization or force out here. Be at the march, November 6th, this Saturday, Malcolm X Park, Washington, D.C. Uhuru.